At this time, I'm going to call up our keynote speaker. Let me tell you a little bit about her first, though. Lynn Rosenthal is the Director of Sexual and Gender-Based Violence at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In 2021, Lynn Rosenthal served as chair of the Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault in the U.S. military. This commission produced groundbreaking recommendations for responding to and preventing sexual assault and harassment. From 2009 to 2015, she was the first ever White House advisor on violence against women, reporting to then Vice President Biden and coordinating with federal agencies on new initiatives to reduce domestic violence and sexual assault. It was a great honor for her to represent the Vice President on the White House Council of Women and the White House Council on Women and Girls, and to co-chair the White House Task Force to protect students from sexual assault in the Obama administration. Rosenthal is honored to return to public service at the Department of Health and Human Services, a mission-driven agency filled with great people working to make a difference. I am so excited to have you here. I know everyone is very excited to hear what you have to say. Let's help me welcome Lynn Rosenthal to the stage. I just need to move this over here.
Well, first of all, no one should have to speak after Chief Hoskin, right? I mean, nobody should, but I'm honored to do so. And I'm really here to congratulate the Cherokee Nation on this first-of-a-kind event and on the remarkable work that's happening here to end domestic violence. I knew about it, but then I came and I saw it in action. I'm looking over here at Delegate Teehee, and I have to tell you that we worked together in the Obama White House, and she's actually the reason why I made it through, because I had the opportunity with her to brief then Vice President Biden and learn from how she was able to communicate complex policy in real human terms, much like Chief Hoskin does for all of you here. To prepare for coming here, I watched Jennifer Lauren's show, Wherever We Are, the Violence Against Women edition, and I was really overwhelmed by what I heard from the incredible speakers, Chief Hoskin, Delegate Teehee, Attorney General Hill, and others, Deb Proctor from One Fire, and Becky, among other survivors who spoke. And I was overwhelmed by their words, and their words gave me tremendous hope for the future, because I believe, you all know the data, I don't have to tell you, you've been listening to it for 3 days, you've heard from every expert in victim services and legal, jurisdiction and justice, so you know all of that. But I have been feeling, what's been in my heart, is that we have been going backwards on this issue as a country, as a nation, governments across the board, from local onward. I felt that we've been retreating from the progress that has been made. I felt that public attitudes have been sliding backwards. I've heard so many people, even in positions of authority, repeat some of the old myths that we thought we had gotten rid of, like, why does she stay? Like, it must be her fault. Like, women lie. Like, this isn't real. She's crazy. She's making it up. And I have heard that in recent years and months, and I have felt that we were going backwards. And because I've had that sense in my heart of being demoralized, then I come here and I meet all of you and I listen to the chief, and I know that there is hope here, and that in fact what the Cherokee Nation is doing is leading, and not to be hyperbolic, but leading in the world on this issue. So please, a round of applause for all of you. When I listened to the video and then I came here and met people this morning, there were some things that I wanted to reflect back to you. Chief Hoskins talked about the responsibility of governments to their people. Attorney General Hill spoke about justice. Delegate Teehee spoke about policy and history and where policy fits. Deb Proctor talked about wrapping victims, and the chief repeated that, wrapping victims in so much support, and the image of a blanket is the perfect one. And Becky talked on this video about what it meant to her as a survivor to feel her nation was with her, her nation was behind her, and this is what it's going to take to end domestic violence. And this is what gives me hope. This is what makes me feel like there is a light ahead for survivors. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to participate in this exercise where in a big room like this, the lights are dim, turned down, and the speaker says to survivors, we have everything you need. We have housing, we have legal support, we have health care, we have justice, but it's outside in the hallway, and the room is pitch black. And you feel like, how am I gonna get out there? The room is so dark. I can't find my way to the housing, to the legal assistance, to the justice. I cannot find it. And what you're doing here is you're turning on that light so that survivors can find everything that they need. In my role at the Department of Health and Human Services, I work across the agency, much like in the Cherokee Nation's agencies, to coordinate efforts on domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, and other forms of gender-based violence. But what I really think of myself as is a carrier of President Biden's vision on this issue. And as I was sitting here, I was thinking, I want Chief Hoskin and President Biden to meet and talk about this issue because they have so much of the same heart and passion for it. But you all know, or you may not know, President Biden's story. In 1994, he wrote the very first Violence Against Women Act. He did that because he was studying crime data, and he was seeing that while most kinds of crimes were trending down, domestic violence and crimes against women were trending up. And so he sent his staff around the country, and they heard stories. They wrote a report of a week in the life of American women, 200 stories of the most horrific violence. You don't even have to imagine it because you hear about it every day. And then he brought this report to the U.S. Congress, and these stories had never been told before in the halls of the U.S. Congress. And women came and testified about being ignored by systems, about being disbelieved, about being re-victimized over and over wherever they turned. And their stories became the foundation of the first Violence Against Women Act. And then over the years, the act was expanded. It started with a look at the justice system. For those of you in the room who are law enforcement, that's where it started. What could law enforcement do to investigate these crimes, to hold the perpetrators accountable? But over the years, as we learn more about how communities experience violence, how families experience violence, the act was expanded to include many of the things that the chief spoke about: housing, legal assistance, prevention, care for children. And of course, we know the very historic nature of VAWA in 2013, and then again in 2022, where Congress recognized the inherent authority of tribes to prosecute non-Native offenders, recognized the inherent authority of tribes to prosecute non-Native offenders. Not gave it, recognized it. So that's the Violence Against Women Act. And then when I worked for Vice President Biden in the White House, he asked us to look at something he was disturbed by, and that was the very high rates of dating violence against young women ages 16 to 24. Why were they still, after all this work, experiencing such high rates of violence? And so he challenged us, because we know that when a teen experiences abuse by a partner, they're twice as likely to experience that abuse again as an adult. So then Vice President Biden recognized this is where we should be working. That resonated with me, because when I was 19 years old, I was badly abused by a boyfriend. I was a young college student. I never would have used the term victim. I wouldn't have said, certainly I was battered. I didn't know anything. I just knew that I had a bad relationship and that my boyfriend had tried to kill me. And so it resonated with me all these many years later. And I should say, for those of you who are survivors, I didn't deal with that trauma in my life until recent years. I went on, I got free, and I got myself back in school, and I went on to do this work, and I still never dealt with that trauma until very recent years. It derailed me for much of my 20s as a young woman. So when I was working for the vice president, and he said, this is the work we needed to do, I started really understanding what had happened to me. You know, I don't have to tell you, healing is not, it's not linear. It comes and goes, and I will tell you at my age, it still comes and goes. Healing and recovery still come and go. So I wanted to share with you that this was when he was vice president, this was President Biden's commitment. And I want to encourage you to keep working with your youth, because that's where we're going to make the most change. I wanted to tell you two other stories from the Obama White House, because I think they have relevance to the work we're hearing about here. The first was with Delegate Teehee, who played such a pivotal role in the Tribal Law and Order Act in 2010. And I wanted to tell you about the day the act was signed. And you can see this on YouTube. There's a video of it. So on the day this act was signed, a woman named Lisa Marie Ayotte, who grew up on the Rosebud Reservation and had been the victim of a very violent rape, came to DC to introduce President Obama in the East Room of the White House. And when she got there, she couldn't get in because the gate she had gone to was not the gate that was to clear her in. So she walked around the White House twice before she got in. I wrote about this in a book called West Wingers, and I sent it to Lisa Marie and said, does this reflect your memory of that day? And she said it does. So she walked around the White House twice in the heat of the summer, trying to get in for this very important task. And then she finally got in, and she was so calm. We were all in a little bit of a panic because we couldn't get her in where she needed to be. She finally got in. She had 8 minutes to get into the room to meet President Obama before she was to introduce him. I don't know if you remember this day. And she stood up on the stage in the East Room of the White House, and she couldn't speak. She was on the stage by herself, and President Obama was behind the closed doors, and she was to introduce him and to bring him out. And she was so overcome with emotion about her story and that she was in the White House to share it that she couldn't speak. She stood and sobbed. And she just stood there. So we didn't know what was going to happen. And then President Obama came running out on the stage and put his arm around her. You have to watch this because it's so powerful. And he said, I've got you. And then she was able to take a deep breath and tell her story, which was very powerful about the importance of the Tribal Law and Order Act. Later, I asked her, how do you feel? And she said, he's the one who got me through it. President Obama got me through it. And I was thinking of her as I listened to Chief Hoskin, that sense of leadership, like, we're with you. The highest leaders are with you, a survivor of rape and a survivor of domestic violence. The second story I wanted to tell you is about workplace policies, because I know that that's part of your initiative here to train employers on what they need to understand for victims and survivors in the workplace. So in 2011, President Obama signed an order requiring U.S. federal agencies to have policies to help victim survivors in the workplace and to address domestic violence. And we were really excited about it because it was an order that was signed by the president. We had an event and we talked about it. But I still felt as an advisor that its importance wouldn't be understood across the White House. I thought, it sounds kind of bureaucratic, so you have to have policies. And so I went back to my desk at the end of this day and I thought, do people really get this importance? And then my phone rings at my desk in the White House, and this woman's on the other end of the line, and she says, you don't know me. She says, I work literally in the basement of the West Wing in some very obscure records office, and she said, you'll probably never meet me. But I wanted to tell you and Vice President Biden how important this order was. She said, years ago, I had a colleague at another federal agency who was killed by her husband, and none of us knew how to help her. And if these policies had been in place, her life might have been saved. So you will never know. I happen to be at my desk. I happen to get that call. You may never know how the work you're doing is touching people's lives, but I want to assure you that it is. It's not just life-saving, it's life-changing. In my role today at the Department of Health and Human Services, I work to coordinate these offices, and I work closely with the Administration for Native Americans who are seeking to implement the executive order on public safety and criminal justice and addressing the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people. They're hard at work developing a prevention plan. They're looking at what are the risk factors and what are the protective factors. And so keep an eye out for their work because it's going to engage all of us. This is a public health approach to something that is not only a criminal justice problem, but a public health problem. And of course, I also want you to know that the Administration for Children and Families, the Office on Family Violence Prevention and Services, is funding tribal programs and funding the Strong Hearts Native Helpline and funding capacity building for the tribal women's coalitions. And so there's a tremendous amount of work going on in their shop as well. Last year, those grantees served more than 30,000 Indigenous women and their dependents. So the services are there, but the number should never be so high. None of this will work at the local level, the state, the tribal level, the nation level. None of it will work unless it's rooted in what you're doing here. Rooted in what you're doing here, which is to put survivors and their families in the center of the circle and holding them sacred. In fact, I believe that what you're doing here in the Cherokee Nation is a light for the world, truly a light for the world. Thank you all so much.